When my stepsister and my fiancé found out that they'd been promoted because of my research, he whispered, "She was just the brains, we're the face." They took my credit and humiliated me on stage. 7 hours later, every shareholder pulled their investment. She was the company. When my mom married Leora's dad, I was 17, fresh off a scholarship letter from MIT and barely speaking to anyone outside my books. I was painfully shy, more comfortable writing Python than making small talk. Leora, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of attention. The kind of girl who'd get an A after copying someone else's homework and charm the teacher into thinking she came up with it all on her own. She always had a way of making herself the center of attention, even when the room wasn't hers. We were never close, but we played nice for the sake of our parents. Over the years, we drifted, reconnected, drifted again. The usual with blended families. I went on to finish undergrad and then get my master's in systems engineering. She went into PR and branding, because of course she did. Then came Marius. I met him through work. He was consulting for Ardent Apex, the tech company I'd been at for 5 years by then. We were working on predictive disaster management systems, tools that could be deployed in real time to assist hospitals, first responders, and aid workers. It was the most meaningful work I'd ever done. Marius wasn't in development. He worked in outreach and partnerships. Good-looking, charming, and very good at convincing people he was smarter than he actually was. He used to tease me for being too in the weeds with my code. Said I needed to learn how to package brilliance for the real world. It didn't bother me at first. He was warm. Listened to me. Asked about my projects. At least, I thought he did. We started dating after a long stretch of late nights and conference calls. Then he moved into my place. Then came the ring. Somewhere along the way, Leora wormed back into the picture. She and Marius got along too well. At first, I thought it was harmless. She'd help us with PR materials for the algorithm launch. She had a background in branding. It made sense. Until it didn't. The project was mine. I had led a team of 10 for 3 years to develop this system. It wasn't flashy, there were no robots or flying drones. It was a lean, clean AI system built on complex models that could predict supply chain bottlenecks during natural disasters. We tested it in simulation after simulation. Accuracy jumped from 78% to 93%. The final model? All mine. I even named it RAISE, Resource Allocation in Emergency Systems. The initial investor pitch listed me as the primary developer and inventor. My name was on the provisional patent. Everything was in order. Then came the company-wide memo. Ardent Apex was preparing to launch RAISE at the International Crisis Tech Forum in San Francisco. It was our biggest moment yet. Except the memo didn't list me as the speaker. It listed Marius and Leora as co-leads of the project. I immediately sent an email to our VP. Her reply? Cambria, you'll be included in the advisory segment. Leora and Marius tested the marketing applications and public implementation strategies. We felt it would be best if they fronted the presentation. I felt like I was choking on my own breath. They had tested my system? Leora hadn't even known what machine learning meant 3 months ago. Marius only ever asked about timelines and funding. I stayed quiet. I wish I hadn't, but I did. I told myself it didn't matter who spoke, what mattered was that it was finally being used. I kept working. Finalized the code. Polished the model. I even added new layers of real-time adaptability to the algorithm, improvements that made it 12% more effective. No one thanked me. They barely acknowledged it. At the launch, I was seated 4 rows back from the stage. My name was mentioned once. Barely. Then came the moment. Marius, in a sleek gray suit. Leora in a white blazer, all pearls and teeth. They looked like tech's next power couple. He took the mic and started talking about how they had been developing the system for a year. They? I nearly stood up. Then he leaned in toward her during applause and whispered into her mic, "He thought it was off, she was just the brains, we're the face." I froze. My mouth went dry. Around me, people were smiling, clapping, nodding along. No one had heard what he said, but I did. And Leora smiled. She didn't correct him. She didn't flinch. They had planned this. Together. Later that evening, while everyone drank champagne and celebrated, I went back to the hotel. I sat at the edge of the bed in my conference badge and evening dress, staring at my laptop. For months, I'd kept a separate log, documenting my contributions, code reviews, Git histories, timestamps, video calls. I wasn't paranoid. I was careful. I'd seen what happened to quiet women in loud industries. And now I had everything I needed. I drafted the email carefully. No emotion. Just data. Subject: clarifying credit on Ray's AI system. I attached documents, logs, timestamped code files. Recordings of meetings. Screenshots of email threads. The patent application in my name. I CC'd the board. The CTO. The lead investors. Our private equity contacts. Even a few journalists I knew from MIT days. I hit send at 3:42 a.m. Then I shut my laptop and slept like a stone. By 10 a.m., Ardent Apex was in a full-scale internal review. For major investors had already pulled out. The CTO called me directly. Her voice was calm, but her words were swift. "You've made your case. I want you to take over as CTO. Effective immediately. But we'll need to make some changes in the PR team and executive suite." I knew what she meant. Leora and Marius were out. They were both escorted out of the hotel conference center before lunch. They didn't speak to me that day. Not when they were pulled from the second panel. Not when their names were scrubbed from the presentation materials. Not even when the press release was updated midday to reflect an internal reassessment of credit attribution. Leora walked past me once in the lobby, sunglasses on despite being indoors, a small rolling suitcase behind her. She didn't look angry. She looked embarrassed. Her eyes didn't meet mine. That told me everything. "Marius?" He lingered longer. I saw him near the elevators. He was on his phone, pacing, voice low but sharp, probably trying to salvage what remained of his image. He caught sight of me as I stepped out of the elevator. He didn't say anything right away. Just stared. Then, with a forced casual shrug, he muttered, "You really didn't have to burn everything down." I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to speak. Because if I did, I might have said something I couldn't take back, and I wanted him to remember my silence more than my anger. The next few weeks were chaos. Ardent Apex initiated a full audit. Turns out, it wasn't just credit theft, there were financial irregularities in some of Marius's partnership reports. Nothing criminal, but enough to close doors that might have otherwise stayed open for him. Leora tried to pivot. Released a statement on her professional page about how collaboration can sometimes blur boundaries, and how she was stepping away to reflect on growth. She turned off comments. I didn't reply. I didn't post. I didn't say a word publicly. The company took care of that. In a blog post about leadership restructuring, my name appeared first. My face, just a professional headshot in a navy blouse, sat next to the heading Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Cambria Holt. I kept my LinkedIn open that entire day, watching as messages poured in. Old professors, former classmates, interns I had mentored. Even strangers. There was a theme to them. I knew it was your work. Finally, someone stood up. About time they gave credit where it was due. Privately, though, it wasn't easy. I'd loved Marius. I had trusted him with everything. He knew how hard I worked, how long I stayed up fine-tuning the model, testing ethical parameters, obsessing over simulations. He knew what this meant to me. That betrayal didn't fade quickly. Worse, I kept replaying the moments I had ignored, him glossing over my ideas in meetings, brushing off my need for testing over flashier visuals. Him saying, "You're too humble for your own good," when I hesitated to take credit. I'd mistaken manipulation for support. As for Leora, I realized I'd spent years trying to earn her approval, hoping we could one day be the kind of sisters you see in movies. But we were never that. We were strangers in family clothes. One evening, a box arrived at my apartment. No note. Inside, the engagement ring. I didn't cry. Not then. I just placed it back in the velvet case and dropped it in the drawer with all the other things I no longer had use for. 2 months later, Ardent Apex landed its largest international contract, a pilot program deploying rays in Southeast Asia during monsoon season. We saw a 37% increase in logistical efficiency and a 22% reduction in resource waste. The numbers didn't lie. I presented the results at a UN Humanitarian Tech Summit in Geneva. It was the same kind of stage Marius and Leora had stood on, beaming under lights meant for someone else. But this time, it was just me. I wore a simple black blazer. No entourage. No theatrics. When I stepped off the stage, a man from the Norwegian Emergency Operations Center approached me and said, "You don't look like the usual tech execs." I smiled. That's because I actually built the tech. Back home, the silence that followed was something new. Peaceful, but empty. I'd spent so long chasing recognition and approval, I didn't know what to do once I had it. Work kept me busy, of course. Always did. But I was different now. I didn't chase meetings. I didn't explain myself in emails. I hired 2 women, one a single mom, the other a brilliant neurodivergent analyst, because I saw the younger versions of me in both of them. I started mentoring quietly. Behind the scenes. I'd seen how loud the spotlight could get. I didn't need it anymore. Still, some nights I sat alone on my balcony, a glass of red wine in hand, and wondered, would they ever admit what they did? Would it eat at them? Or would they just spin the story for themselves until they believed it was true? 6 months passed. Then, without warning, I got an email. Subject: would love to catch up, no pressure, just coffee? From Leora Tanner. My first instinct was to delete it. But I didn't. I just stared at it for a while, as if the pixels might rearrange themselves into something more sincere. There was no apology. No acknowledgement. Just a cheerful line about being in San Diego for a few days and wondering if we could meet as sisters. I closed the laptop without responding. I didn't owe her clarity or closure. Not anymore. Still, it lingered with me all week, like a mosquito bite you don't want to scratch, but can't help touching. I found myself thinking about her more than I wanted to. How easily she'd stepped into a world she hadn't earned, how confidently she'd spoken over me on stage, how little remorse she seemed to carry even now. But also, how empty her life must feel after it all fell apart. Work grew. Rays expanded into 3 more international regions. We'd set up a separate division for developing partner modules, one that integrated with drones to deploy rapid response kits to isolated flood zones. The project was ambitious, but this time I had full control over the direction, the credits, the leadership team. I also made it clear, no more PR face takers. My work would speak for itself, and the team behind it would be fully visible. The irony was that the very traits I was once told were too technical, too back-end, were the ones making our company the most respected in the field. One evening, at a dinner with potential partners from the UN Development Program, someone asked, "You don't seem like someone who ever wanted to lead a company. Did you always know this was where you'd end up?" I laughed, not bitterly, just softly, like a weight had finally settled where it belonged. "No," I said. "But I always knew I didn't want anyone else taking the wheel." Then came Marius. It was a quiet Thursday morning when he showed up. Not at my office, he would have been escorted out in under 10 seconds, but at the Co-op Cafe 2 blocks from my apartment. I saw him through the window while I was picking up my usual. He looked older. Not in the physical sense, but worn. Less curated. There was a brief flicker of discomfort in his eyes when he realized I'd spotted him. I could have walked away. I should have. Instead, I walked inside and said, flatly, if you're here to talk, make it short. He stood. Cambria. Please. Just 5 minutes. I didn't sit. I didn't take off my coat. He tried to smile. That old, disarming smile that once used to work on me. It's good to see you. You look, well. I am. I didn't elaborate. He nodded. I just wanted to say I was wrong. About everything. About how we handled it. About what we said. I let the opportunity go to my head, and he paused, searching for the right words. I never should have let them put you in the background. I tilted my head. Them? Or us? He flinched. Just barely. Us, he corrected. It was us. The apology, if you could call it that, felt like a performance. Like he'd practiced it. Polished it. Maybe for his own conscience. Maybe hoping I'd soften, offer a bridge back to relevance. I didn't. You didn't just let it happen, Marius. You orchestrated it. And when you thought no one was listening, you summed up everything I meant to you in one sentence. He winced. I didn't mean it like that, but you said it like that. I cut in. And you believed it. There was a long pause between us. Outside, traffic buzzed. Someone's dog barked twice. Inside, the tension sat between us like a third person. I'm not asking for anything, he finally said. I think about it every day. And I wanted you to know that. I nodded once. Not with warmth, not with forgiveness, just acknowledgement. I turned to leave. Cambria, he said again, softly. I paused at the door. You were always the company. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The only version of me he knew was the one who waited for credit, hoped for validation, stayed quiet so others could shine. But that woman? She didn't exist anymore. That night, I pulled out an old photo album, one of the few things I kept from my early days at Ardent Apex. Tucked inside was a photo of me, back when I'd first joined. Hair pulled back, oversized sweater, no makeup. I remembered how small I felt in those rooms filled with louder voices. I didn't feel small anymore. Not because I'd gotten louder, but because I no longer felt the need to prove I belonged. That was the real revenge. Not the job, not the titles, not the acclaim. But the peace. Weeks after Marius resurfaced, I thought of Leora again. Not because I missed her. I didn't. But because people kept bringing her up, softly, cautiously, like they were testing the temperature of the air before stepping in. At conferences, a few older colleagues would say, "Is your sister still in branding?" with polite hesitation, as if the word sister had become radioactive. I usually gave a non-committal shrug. I didn't need to explain that we hadn't spoken since her email. But curiosity's a funny thing. Late one night, I opened a private browser and searched her name. Not to gloat. Just to see where she'd landed. Her website was gone. LinkedIn, still up, but stripped down, sparse. No mention of Ardent Apex. The only role listed was freelance brand strategist, independent consultant. A few vague posts about resilience, reinvention, stepping away from toxic spaces. The irony was almost comedic. She hadn't disappeared, but she'd faded. She no longer took up the kind of space she used to. And maybe that was for the best, for both of us. Still, when I saw that she'd joined a Women in Business panel for Navigating Reputational Crises, I laughed out loud. Not bitterly. Just with that same dry amusement you feel when an old villain starts trying to rebrand herself as the misunderstood hero. Professionally, things were moving faster than I could have imagined. Raise had become not just a product, but a platform. Universities were reaching out to integrate the tech into disaster preparedness curriculums. International coalitions wanted to license a slimmed-down version for rural deployment. But my favorite project, by far, was the fellowship we launched. It started small. I carved out budget from our annual surplus and pitched it to the board as a targeted mentorship initiative. The goal: fund and support young women and non-traditional candidates in data science. No flashy marketing, no name-dropping. Just scholarships, training, access. We called it the Build Forward Fellowship. Every quarter, I'd sit in on the final round of interviews. Not to judge, but to listen. One applicant, a 27-year-old Syrian refugee who taught herself Python from YouTube videos while working night shifts, reminded me so much of myself, just with more grit. She'd been denied entry to a dozen coding boot camps because she didn't have a college degree. We accepted her on the spot. After the Zoom call, I sat at my desk, quiet for a long time. I thought of how differently my story might have turned out if someone had seen me, really seen me, before I had to fight for it. Now I was building the kind of ladder I never had. Then one day, out of nowhere, a message arrived. Not by email. Not by LinkedIn. A small white envelope, handwritten, no return address. Inside, a card. Just a single line. I understand now. I really do. No signature, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Leora's. I stared at it for a long while. Not angry. Not sad. Just tired. Because understanding, when it comes too late, feels more like a ghost than a gift. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry, though, for a long time I had been, but because I didn't want her apology to be for me. I wanted it to be for her. For the version of herself she'd buried under ambition and ego and entitlement. That weekend, I drove up the coast. No agenda. No laptop. Just silence and sea air. I stopped at a roadside bookstore in Monterey, the kind with creaky floors and sun-bleached shelves. The owner was an older man who barely looked up when I walked in. I found a copy of A Wrinkle in Time, the book that had made me fall in love with science as a child. I bought it without thinking. As I paid, the man glanced at the cover and said, "That one changed a lot of lives." I nodded. It changed mine. I didn't tell him who I was. Didn't tell him what I'd built. Didn't mention algorithms or CTO titles or broken engagements. In that moment, I was just someone rediscovering a piece of herself. A quiet kind of power. I kept the card from Leora, tucked into the back of that book. Not as a wound, but as a reminder. Not everything needs an answer. Some things are just echoes. A full year passed before I saw either of them again. I was giving a keynote speech at the Pacific Tech Resilience Summit in Los Angeles, one of those big, polished events with velvet ropes and camera crews, where sponsors try to outdo each other with sleek displays and empty promises. I didn't usually enjoy these things, but this one mattered. It was where we were unveiling Raise 3.0, our most advanced version yet, now integrated with predictive language models to assist in multilingual crisis zones. It had taken 5 years of work. I stood on the stage not as someone's advisor or behind-the-scenes genius, but as the lead architect. My name was on every press kit, every screen, every badge. The night before my talk, I attended the welcome reception, a low-lit cocktail hour on a rooftop garden in downtown LA. I was sipping seltzer water, half listening to a conversation about post-flood logistics, when I heard it, her laugh. I turned slowly. Leora stood at a nearby table, laughing that familiar, breathy laugh, the one she always used when she wanted to sound like she was part of the joke even if she didn't get it. She looked thinner, like someone still trying to fit into an old life. Her clothes were still expensive, but the aura of effortless glamour had dulled. And standing beside her? Marius. Wearing a visitor badge. Not a speaker badge. Not exhibitor. Visitor. Their eyes met mine almost simultaneously. She froze. He blinked once, gave a half smile, unsure if he should wave. He didn't. I didn't either. Instead, I turned back to the group I was speaking with and continued the conversation. I didn't break eye contact again. I didn't walk away or confront them or make a scene. And that, somehow, hit harder than anything else ever could have. The next morning, my keynote began precisely at 10 a.m. I opened with a simple line: "When I started this project, people told me I needed someone else to package my work. That the world only listens when the right face is talking. Today, I'd like to prove them wrong." There were small murmurs of recognition across the crowd. I didn't name them. I didn't need to. The rest of the presentation went smoothly. I demoed our new features, told stories from the field, spotlighted the engineers and field testers who had risked their safety to deploy the early systems in hurricane zones. The room stood when I finished. Later that afternoon, I passed by the exhibit floor, and I spotted Leora again. This time, she wasn't networking. She was sitting alone on a bench in the corner, checking her phone every few seconds, clearly waiting for someone, anyone, to come over and recognize her. No one did. Marius wasn't with her. I paused just for a moment, far enough not to be seen. Watching her there, small, diminished, not by cruelty, but by time and truth, I felt no rush of vengeance. Just completion. She'd tried to take everything from me. But she ended up with nothing I ever wanted. 3 weeks later, something even more unexpected happened. One of our newest fellowship recipients forwarded me a blog post titled "The Other Side of the Pitch: How I Let Ambition Eat My Integrity." It had no byline. But the tone, the phrasing, the references, it was unmistakably Leora's voice. In it, she detailed how she'd spent years believing that image outweighed substance, that stealing the spotlight was as good as earning it. She wrote about betrayal, not as the victim, but as the one who caused it. There were no names. No excuses. Just a quiet, belated truth. I didn't respond. I didn't share it. I didn't even forward it. But I bookmarked it. Because it was the first thing she'd ever written that was truly her own. It's been 2 years now. Ardent Apex is no longer just a tech company. It's become a blueprint, a model for how research and ethics can coexist, how the best work happens when the right people are seen, not silenced. We've funded over 60 fellows through Build Forward. 38 are now working in government, humanitarian aid, and health tech. 5 have started their own companies. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Marius and Leora hadn't tried to take what wasn't theirs. Would I have still found this path? Would I still have fought as hard? Maybe. Maybe not. But I do know this: they were the face. I was the foundation. And when the storm came, I was the one who stood.